Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Jen Mason McAward. I'm the director of the Klau Institute for Civil and Human Rights. And we are so privileged to have partnered with the Catholic Mobilizing Network to bring this panel discussion to you today. October 10th is the World Day Against the Death Penalty. And in advance of that, we are here to learn from our guests who have been affected in different ways by the death penalty. So we have a lawyer and an advocate, the mother of a gun violence victim, and an exoneree who spent close to 6 years on death row in Alabama for a crime that he did not commit. We are really privileged today to learn from them and to do so in a spirit of learning ourselves and kind of entering into that path with them. So I'd now like to invite Haley Palumbo, who is the president of the Law School's Death Penalty Abolition Society, to give us the opening prayer.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It was so lovely to meet Gary, so I'm so excited to do this prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God, eternal Father, you are the living God. Life is who you are. Life is what you love. Life is what you breathe. Creation was made to house life. Life is what you give. Human life is your most beloved, and what you most affirmed when you sent your eternal Son to take flesh, to die our death, and to rise again gloriously. Help us to be a people of life, a church that can do no other than love what you so mightily love, and defend what your Son so willingly died and rose to defend. Amen.
I now have the honor to introduce Emily Mendoza-Waters, who's the director of the Death Penalty Abolition Program at the Catholic Mobilizing Network. She brings 20 years of experience in Catholic education, advocacy, and ministry. She has a particular focus on creating programs for young adults to engage in both direct service and advocacy work. She's amazing. She's been a terrific partner, and we're just really grateful to the work that she's done in gathering this amazing panel today. So, Emily, thank you, and welcome back to Notre Dame.
Well, thank you, Professor McElroy. Let's see. Oh, wait, there's our prayer. There we go. Thank you. I just have to say, I have a little university envy. Every time I walk and come to Notre Dame, I'm like, why didn't I come to Notre Dame? It is a gift and a privilege to be here, and I want to say thank you for the Klau Institute for hosting us and for our panelists who are here this evening. What I want to do before we really get into the heart of our conversation is kind of give you a framework of who Catholic Mobilizing Network is and really what does the death penalty look like in the United States right now before we get into the stories and to the lives who have been directly impacted. So Catholic Mobilizing Network, we're a national Catholic organization working to end the death penalty and work towards restorative justice. We're based in Washington, D.C. We've been around for about 15 years. We really started out from the bishop's call to end to the death penalty. Something to note, when we know that stories have this power of transformation, but we also know that the stories that we'll hear can be hard and might challenge us in different ways. So I ask you, as you listen to the stories, just be aware of yourself and what you might need and know what university resources and support systems that you might need to connect with. Okay, so let's look at this map. So right now, today, there are 23 states that have abolished the death penalty, with Virginia being the latest to abolish in 2021. And so those are the dark blue. What you'll see in the light blue are the 4 states that have a governor-imposed moratorium, so a pause. So that's California, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Oregon. That leaves 27 states that still have the death penalty, and many of which are currently executing, including here in Indiana. So just a show of hands, how many of you guys are from Indiana? Okay. How many of you guys are from Florida? Texas? Missouri? Alabama? Gary, you need to raise your hand. Gary's from Alabama. There are approximately 2,100 people on death row, and since 1973, there have been 201 death row exonerees. That includes Gary here. This year we've seen an uptick in executions. You might have seen it in the news. As of this year, we're at 34 executions over 10 states, with an execution in the state of Indiana. So here, a few days from now, on the World Day Against the Death Penalty on October 10th. And then since 1978, there have been over 1,600 executions in the United States. Let me show you the faces. October, in particular, is really difficult and challenging. There are 8 scheduled executions this month. And if you are in the Catholic world, or if you're, this month is Respect Life Month. And then as you see, Mr. Ward on October 10th is his scheduled execution. In Indiana, they schedule their executions at midnight, so that will actually be happening on Thursday evening into Friday morning. Let me just, since we're in Indiana, and Indiana is one of our death penalty priority states, meaning we think there's potential here, so there's hope, but I want to give you context of where you're going to school, where you're living, and what's happening in the state of Indiana. So right now, there's currently 7 people on death row. Since 1978, there have been 2 innocent people who've been exonerated from the state of Indiana. And last year, Indiana resumed executions after a pause of 15 years. And that resumption of cost Indiana over $1 million on execution drugs. Indiana and the death penalty has been in the news in the last year. So if you do a quick Google, you'll see your current governor, Governor Braun. Of that $1 million, over half of that, those funds went to waste because the drugs were expired. This is in addition to studies that have shown that capital cases in Indiana are 4.25 times as much as non-capital murder cases, which we'll hear more from Ruth, but the federal death row is also located in Indiana and Terre Haute. And then in 2020 and 2021, over a short span of 6 months, there were 13 people executed in the federal prison here in Indiana. I want to just give you some top line things of what we know about the death penalty. And again, this is scratching the surface because really the heart of our conversation is with our panelists. But like I mentioned specifically about Indiana, the death penalty is significantly more expensive than life in prison without parole. And oftentimes these are driven by lengthy trials, mandatory appeals, and depending on the states, but they can show to be 1.5 million more than non-death penalty cases. Execution methods. How is our country executing people today? States are struggling to obtain lethal injection drugs, and some are resorting to using compound drugs. These drugs don't require the same approval as other drugs and are not approved by the FDA. Because some of these challenges, and it's getting more difficult to get these lethal injection drugs, states are bringing back some old methods, including firing squad. So in the spring, March of this year, the state of South Carolina executed Brad Sigmund by firing squad. In addition to firing squad, there's a new method, nitrogen hypoxia, basically nitrogen suffocation. And so Alabama in 2024 was the first state to use this new method of gassing. Even though the American Veterinarian Medical Association says it's inappropriate for euthanizing animals. So we're slowly seeing some of these states create new laws to include this new method. And I believe Indiana might be trying to introduce that. racial bias. We know that the death penalty disproportionately affects people of color. Innocence, you're going to hear from Gary. We know that for every 8 people executed in the U.S., 1 person on death row is innocent, has been exonerated. And then we're at Notre Dame. I wanted to kind of show you what the church has shared and talked about in regards to the death penalty. And so what you'll see here is that the 3 previous popes have all been consistent in saying that the death penalty undermines human dignity, is cruel, and does not bring about true justice. In 2018, Pope Francis updated the catechism to say that the death penalty is inadmissible because of its attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. By Pope Francis putting this update in the catechism, it made clear that it is a part of our faith to oppose capital punishment. And most recently, Pope Leo recently spoke about the death penalty, reminding us that the death penalty is a pro-life issue. Okay, that was the death penalty and the church in 4 minutes. Hopefully you will learn more about this. Do your own research. Please continue to understand what this looks like in the United States. And so what I really want to do is begin our conversation with our wonderful guests here. And so tonight we're just offering a brief glimpse into the complexities of what capital punishment looks like in the U.S. But really I want to introduce our amazing guests here. And so Gary Drinkard, thank you, Gary, for being here. Gary spent close to 6 years on Alabama's death row for a crime he did not commit. After he was exonerated in 2001, he attended college, worked as a laborer, and as a peer specialist for Witness to Innocence, supporting other death row exonerees. Gary has traveled throughout the United States and overseas, sharing his own story about wrongful conviction. Gary recently was elected to be the board chair of Witness to Innocence, an organization that is run by death row exonerees. Next, we have Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker, who has a Master's of Divinity degree from Payne Theological Seminary and a Doctor of Ministry degree from United Theological Seminary. Crystal's ministry focuses on women who've experienced domestic abuse, rape, and/or incest. She is the founder of Pastors Against Domestic Violence, an ecumenical ministry that trains pastors to be courtroom advocates for victims of domestic violence. Crystal is also focused on many additional social injustices in the city of Dayton. She's a strong advocate against the death penalty and for stricter gun laws. She lost her son Edward at age 28 to gun violence. Crystal serves on the board of Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing and is the co-chair of Ohioans to Stop Executions. And finally, we have Ruth Friedman, who has dedicated her career to defending people sentenced to death in both state and federal courts. She began her work at the Southern Center for Human Rights, later joining the Alabama Capital Representation Resource Center and Equal Justice Initiative. For almost 20 years, Ruth served as the director of the Federal Capital Habeas Project, leading efforts that secured President Biden's 2024 clemency grants on 37 men on federal death row. Widely regarded as a litigator, an advocator, and a mentor, and a friend, Ruth has testified and argued in Congress, classrooms, and courts nationwide, and in 2023 received the Southern Center's Frederick Douglass Award. So let's welcome our guests. Well, Gary, Crystal, and Ruth, thank you so much for being with us and being here. I think it's everyone's. Crystal, have you been to Notre Dame before? I have not. It's everyone's first time to Notre Dame. Thank you for traveling. And so to start our conversation, I really wanted them to share their own stories. So we're gonna start with Gary, and the question I'd love for you to share about is your own personal journey. You know, how did you first come to know about the reality of the death penalty? And we'll just start there, okay?
All right. In 1993, my loving sister got stopped for a cocaine violation. She got stopped for some type of traffic violation, got busted with cocaine. In order to get herself out of it, she told the police I robbed and killed a man. Couple of years, I go to trial for a capital murder. I'm thinking, they can't possibly find me guilty. There was no evidence, no physical evidence whatsoever. No fingerprints, no tire tracks, no eyewitness, nothing. And I'm thinking, there's no way they can convict me. So I'm just sitting there waiting on trial. In 1998 or 1995, I was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in an electric chair, where I go straight to death row. No kiss me goodbye, nothing, go straight to death row. And my appeal started. My appeal started at that stage, and I wrote to everybody I could get an address for, begging for help. Got some responses, but very few. In 2000, I was granted my appeal on prosecutorial misconduct. I went back for a second trial with the attorneys that I had written to previously and piqued their interest, and I had a dream team. That's what the newspaper article read. Drinkard's got a dream team, and I really did. We were able to prove to the jury that I was at home the night of the murder, that more than likely my sister and her boyfriend robbed and killed the junkyard dealer, and I was found not guilty and released. I went home thinking, well, I need to get a different vocation from construction. That's what I'd done before. I went to a local community college, respiratory therapy, and I completed about 2 years, and within 6 months of graduation, the hospitals will hire you. I filed a couple of applications at different hospitals, and they laughed and said, well, the hospital will never hire you because of the capital murder on your record. Witness, Sister Helen Presume brings in Witness to Innocence, I think 2004, 2005. In 2005, I joined Witness to Innocence. I have been traveling and speaking for them against the death penalty ever since. I have recently been elected chairman of the board, and I'm going to continue to do this for the rest of my life. And at the end of this, I'm an open book. I'll answer any question you might have.
Thank you, Gary. Crystal?
I'll turn this on and see how it works. Seems like it's okay. When I was a teenager and people were getting executed, it really affected me spiritually. I would get very sick on the night of executions and would pretty much kind of cry out. As I went on and still thought about the death penalty, and I was still very much opposed to it, what happened in seminary is I had to do a case study, and it was to be either for or against the death penalty, and I chose to be against the death penalty. My seminary professor, a pastor, said, "You're only against the death penalty because it hasn't affected you personally." And I was, one, shocked that he would say that, and two, I said, I don't think that that's the case. I'm pretty sure that I would be against the death penalty even if it affected me. In 2013, my 28-year-old son was murdered, and it was very difficult, traumatic experience. There was a retaliatory murder that happened, And my first thought was actually good. And then I thought about that and I was like, oh my gosh, some mother, some brother or sisters, some grandparents, some friends are suffering the same way that I'm suffering, and it is not good. And so I went to the prayer vigil that they have for this young man that was shot as a retaliatory killing, who was not the person that shot my son. My son was murdered by someone that the police know the name of the person. They tried to get me to go to a known gang member's house to see if I could get someone to say that that was him that did it, and they never prosecuted the gentleman, so the gentleman is still running free. But in order for me to live my life, I had to practice and still practice forgiveness. So I'm doing that. And I was approached by Dr. Jack Sullivan, who you all don't know, but yeah, some of you know. And he asked me to be on Journey of Hope with him, and also Ohioans to Stop Executions. And so I've been working to get the death penalty out of Ohio and go on journeys to different states with Journey of Hope ever since.
Thank you, Crystal. Very different stories and experiences. And Ruth, will you share with us how you've come to know the death penalty?
Sure. Okay, is this on? Oh. Well, I feel like I have not been through what either of you have been through. I'm just a lawyer. Which is easy in many respects. I went to law school. I never would have thought I would have been a death penalty lawyer. I was interested in doing something on racial justice. I assumed it would be in the civil context, but I started to learn a little bit about the death penalty in law school, and figured, and some of the people who are in class have heard this before, figured, well, okay, I could go down to Georgia, this New Yorker that I am, and spend 8 weeks of a summer and do that. And I loved it, and I loved it because it was representing or helping represent the people on death row was what I cared about. It was very much and is and always will be a race issue in this country. I got to work with amazing people at the Southern Center for Human Rights and then at the Equal Justice Initiative. And I've never had any question but that this is the right thing to do. I've gotten to meet amazing people like the people here. And that is a really, somebody asked in the class, like, how do you keep doing this? And that's how. It's because it's the right thing to do, because the injustice is far more than I ever could have imagined as a law student. And because there are people fighting. I was privileged then to get to start and run the only defense organization that was started to help people on the federal death row. And that was eye-opening in that I thought somehow it would be different from Alabama's death row. It is, because they have more money involved. But the same problems, lawyers who drop the ball, prosecutors who hide, the same racial disparities, painful all around. And there's so much, like Gary, I'm very happy to answer any questions you have. There's so many ways, so many parts of this that matter, the legal issues, the policy issues, and very much the human issues. I'm thrilled I get to be with these people, and I'm also thrilled that I've gotten to represent the clients that I have, every one of them, because everybody has a story. And they're not throwaway people, which is how our government, or our state governments, or our federal governments want to treat them. Someday, I don't know that I'll be around for it. I hope we get rid of this. I believe we will. And hopefully some of you will be involved in that. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ruth. I love, it's a privilege to be here on this stage, and when we talk about stories,
we tell stories all the time, but this is different because this is their life. And so what I hope is that we'll engage in conversation. So please just, the three of you, chime in. We'll do this for, I have some questions for our panelists to learn more, and then you guys will have an opportunity. So I know that you guys probably have some questions, so please know that we'll have some time for Q&A. Gary, you are an advocate against the death penalty, and one of the questions I have for you is, were you always against the death penalty? And what would you say to someone right now who says, I think we should have the death penalty?
Actually, I was for the death penalty in my earlier years. I thought someone that killed a child or raped and killed a woman should be executed. You know, I really didn't pay any attention to how the justice system was, but if someone were to tell me now, you know, that we need the death penalty, I would tell them they're absolutely mistaken, because if you put a person in prison for the rest of their life, they suffer every day, every single day. Sure, they laugh once in a while, but they've got to do that to keep their sanity. But they suffer every day. And if you give them the death penalty, they make their peace with God. They go out happy. And the death penalty is vengeance. It's not justice, it's vengeance. Plain and simple.
We were at lunch earlier, and one of the students had asked a question about hope. Hope, I think, is a theme, obviously, in the Jubilee year of the Catholic Church, but I think it's a theme here at Notre Dame. And one of the questions, Gary, was, how does one stay hopeful? You know, you talked about suffering of some people on death row, but how does someone continue to live? Where do you find hope when you're on death row?
Fortunately, I had a few pen pals, and in my mind, I couldn't be on death row. I would be living their lives. That they would write me and tell me what they were having for supper, what they were doing on their vacation, and I would be there with them in my mind. My children kept me kind of situated. When I'd get angry or very depressed, I'd write silly little poems. And it was amazing to me that the anger and the depression would go away when I write it down on paper. I continued to do that for a while. But my pen pals, I mean, I had a lot of prayers, a lot of people praying for me, and that gave me some hope. But you can't afford to allow yourself to get real hopeful. I mean, you look for the worst and you hope for the best. That's the attitude you got to keep. Or when your hopes get dashed, you'll go crazy. I've seen a lot of people go crazy and commit suicide.
Thank you, Gary. Crystal, we've done a number of talks together, and I would love to learn more about Edward. And maybe can you share a little bit about your son, what you would want us to know about your son?
Sure, Eddie, as we called him. I called him Eddie Weddy Pumpkin Pie, kissed the girls and make them cry. He was, loved mechanics. He loved taking things apart. So when he was about 5 or 6 years old, we bought him one of those little cars that, you know, you could drive. Within days, he had taken everything apart. We couldn't put it back together again. He had a daughter. We actually, 4 or 5 days before he was murdered, 5 days before he was murdered, the whole family was in Ohio. He had come in. He lived in Ohio. My daughter had come in from Florida. My other son from Indiana. And we were all there at my dad's house celebrating his daughter's soon-to-be second birthday, where he bought her one of those little electronic cars. And she was riding around the street, and it was the last video that I got of him alive. But He loved cars, he loved his daughter, and he was perpetually late. He would always say, my husband's shaking his head, but we would get to his house and he'd be like, I'm about to be there. He would be 2 blocks down the street and it would take him an hour to about to be there. So yeah, he was pretty funny.
Thank you for sharing about Eddie, because often when we talk about the death penalty, they say, well, what about the victims? Isn't this justice? We're doing this. This is justice for the victims. And so people always say, well, what do you say? And so, Crystal, I would love for you to kind of talk about that from a perspective. Gary, we looked at a slide about innocence, but oftentimes the narrative will be, well, this is justice. Something bad happened, and we're doing this for the victims.
You're not doing it for the victims. There are co-victims, which is what we're called, families who do believe in the death penalty, but I do not. I mean, if you execute someone, it's not going to bring my son back to me. It's not going to hurt less. It's going to hurt more because it is not closure. It is bringing more pain to say this mother is feeling that, or this, they may have children or brothers or sisters. My son and daughter are not at the same level of forgiveness that I am, but they understand and they've gone on with their lives and they're, doing everything they can for Eddie's daughter, Lily. So she's a spoiled, rotten 14-year-old at this point.
Like all grandchildren should be spoiled.
All grandchildren, all 11 of them.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important that we hear from all perspectives and all different ways in which people are directly impacted by the death penalty. Ruth, you said you have the easy job. I have, in my time, and there's a number of attorneys, your jobs are so difficult. Besides the legal maneuvering, I also know that you're so invested in your clients' lives, and you spend decades, and so you really do know these individuals. And so, only because I learned about this today, but maybe could you share the connection to Gary? And it's not chance. I just think that we pulled a panel together of some amazing speakers, but there's a connection here.
Sure. Well, I worked at the Equal Justice Initiative, and I started there. I'm not going to mention dates, it's just too long. We would get a lot of requests to represent people on death row. And when we started I said no dates. Okay. We started an organization called Alabama Capital Representation Resource Center. And that was because at that time, Congress felt it was important that death row inmates have lawyers before they were executed. And so federal funding went to organizations around the country, I think there were 16 or 17 of them, that provided representation or consulted with lawyers to help them provide the representation. Some years later, about 6-7 years later, that money was all withdrawn with something in the federal budget that said, no money shall be given to these organizations. Very much from a political perspective, as we don't want to be helping these death row prisoners. So we became a smaller organization. That's when we became Equal Justice Initiative. And we monitored everybody on Alabama's death row. Who got sentenced to death? When will their appeals be coming due? Who was finished their appeals and got affirmed and needs a lawyer in what we call state post-conviction. So that's a lot of what we did. We worked with lawyers, et cetera. And sometimes we ourselves could take cases. And Brian Stevenson, who ran the organization, would come to one of us and say, do you have room? Can you take another case? There's somebody who's moving into state post-conviction. There's someone moving into direct appeal. And so I was not involved in Gary's representation at all, but I remember the case. And I remember one of my colleagues who I'm still in touch with, doing that case. And so, to come out the other end and get to see Gary is an amazing, amazing, wonderful thing. You don't get that very often, and that is, and just to hear you and hear from you and see what you're doing is just a wonderful, wonderful thing.
And you guys remember what day I said I went in.
It was the day before that.
But maybe we could share just between Gary and Ruth. I think it kind of points to one of the issues with the death penalty about chance, arbitrary. So
Absolutely.
Gary, can you just share? When you were, I had asked, how did you get connected to Equal Justice Initiative? Like, how did they know? Can you just share a little bit what you were doing, and then what does that look like on your end? You're working in an office, Ruth. You've got lots of cases. How does that get matched up?
Certainly, I was writing to everybody. I would write a letter to everybody I could get an address for. I had heard of Equal Justice Initiative, so I wrote them and begging for help. I didn't trust the county where I got convicted to appeal my case because they couldn't handle the first case. They got me convicted. So I certainly didn't trust them with the appeals. So I wrote EJI begging for help. Can you help me? Can you help me? And you sit on death row, and back then 78% of the cases got reversed and remanded for some type of error. And you'd see guys get a new trial and go back and get the same shoddy lawyers and come back to death row in 6 to 9 months. So I want some help, and EJI is the best around. So I wrote them, and I was blessed. I was blessed with Randy Suskin. Wrote me and told me he would attempt to perfect my appeals, and he did so.
And maybe Ruth on the other end, how does that happen? Is there a system? What does that look like?
The system is definitely, when we have room and time, one takeaway is there are never enough resources. And that anywhere, it doesn't matter where you're working for the defense of people on death row or people accused of capital crimes, there just are not enough resources. And as I just said, the federal money was taken away, and luckily we had some other private philanthropic money, and so we were able to stay open. We had to lose some staff. So I'd like to say, and maybe it was because your letter was amazing, but I know from cases that I got at the time, it was when I had room and when I could take another case. And it is very painful to have to ever say no. And I know what we did at EJI, and then what I did at the 2055 project is what we also called it at the federal level, was to find lawyers for people. Because if we couldn't do it, we wanted to find you the best that we could. And as Gary said, there's slim pickings in Alabama, unfortunately, and there's lots of reasons for that. There's not a good defense, there's not a history of being criminal defense, yes, Tristan knows, oriented. There's not funds, there's not care and attention paid to the defense of people accused or convicted of serious crimes. And so we couldn't always do it. So sometimes we would look for and try and find lawyers to do it. It really matters to have an institution that does this for a living, because you learn how to do it. You learn what the rules are. You learn what the practice is. You learn what the problems are. And you want the best for everyone. If you were going to have your heart transplanted, you wouldn't go to a podiatrist. And that's what they were doing to people like Gary. They were saying, take this lawyer from this county. We saw it even in the federal system. There was somebody coming through, and they gave him, we didn't offer ourselves as lawyers, but we'd found good capital lawyers to represent him. And the judge was like, oh yeah, he needs lawyers, not you. I'm giving him some other lawyers from Waco, Texas, where he's from. And luckily, it didn't take us that long to conflict those lawyers out, because they shouldn't have been representing him. And we got good lawyers for him, and he's off death row. But some of that is luck and fortuity, and that's the pain of it. There aren't enough resources or expertise for everyone who needs it, and that's a crime.
Brian Stevenson is so good. He kept one man alive through appeals for 30 years, Anthony Hinton, and he was finally able to exonerated.
Persistence, but also luck. And it feels so strange to say that Gary's here because of luck, of that EJI was able to take on his case and to move that forward. Crystal, you know, you have many degrees of working in the church, and you talked about healing. Can you share about your faith and how faith and community has shaped your beliefs in the death penalty? And what you shared, your story about the, was it a pastor who said that? I mean, you already had a conviction, but maybe just share that, because I think most of us probably in the room are coming from some sort of faith tradition. What does that mean for us in the context of the death penalty? And this has particular meaning for you.
Hard question. And can I start this question by asking Gary a question? Okay. How did you come, or if you have, to reconciliation with your sister who set you up?
Sadly, I haven't. I don't see her. I've seen her a couple of times, but she'd always run. I had a bad reputation when I was on the streets, you know. I would fight at the drop of the hat, and she and her boyfriend actually thought I would come kill him. And I met with her boyfriend and told him that I ain't about that, you know, just get on with our lives. And she would never talk to me, but if she would, it probably wouldn't be a pleasant meeting. I mean, her son, I've kept her son with me quite often, and he and I are very close, but I would probably cuss her out.
And that's probably where you start. So for me, my faith believes in reconciliation, that everyone has an opportunity to meet Jesus in their own time if they want to. They don't necessarily have to want to. If we murder someone on death row, and it's murder, however you put it, if we murder someone on death row, we're not giving them the opportunity for reconciliation to people that they may have hurt, or, you know, to Jesus. And that's where we started. Strangely enough, has absolutely nothing to do with the death penalty, but I had an uncle who was dying of cancer, smoked Pall Malls with no filters, and would smoke them after cancer. But he was in a hospice situation, and he knew he was dying. I was there with him, and he was at the stage of comatose. And I sat there, and I wasn't even called to the ministry at this point. It was just something I had to do, felt I needed to do. So I spoke to him, and I asked him, I said, well, do you believe in Jesus? He came out of that coma, and he said, yes. I said, well, that's all you need to be saved, is you confessed. And he went back in his coma, and he died a few days later.
Wow.
But at his funeral, the pastor said, well, we don't know if he's going to heaven or not, because he, you know, wasn't fully immersed when he was, or wasn't baptized by being fully immersed. I'm like, who says that at a funeral? The same thing. Who tells somebody as you're getting ready to die, and you've got people out there looking at it like it's a show? I don't understand that. So that's it. I probably went way off subject.
No, and I think, Crystal, the challenge of forgiveness. I don't know if anyone read today's reading. It was about the Our Father. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. In this context, it's a challenge. It's a challenge every day. Ruth, you know, you've worked on so many cases and have known so many different individuals. Can you maybe share one of the cases that has impacted you? I'm sure there's many.
Yeah. I just want to pick up on one thing. When you just said just now, when you said, who says that at a funeral? I also feel like, who tells people who they are? You know, and I think that's really true for our clients. It's like, you're a criminal, you're a murderer, you're an arsonist. Well, no, I'm a person, and I may have done a bad thing, and it's rarely what they said you did, whether you're fully innocent or not. And who gets the right to do that? Or the right to decide that you should die? Oh boy, there've been a lot of people. I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about one. I'll talk about one story. This is a man named Bruce Webster. Bruce, when we started, when our project started, our program started in the federal system, there were already a lot of people on federal death row, and many of them, some of them had gone through their appeals already. And we started during the Bush administration, and it matters who's president and who's attorney general for purposes of the death penalty, for sure. We were in the Obama administration, and because of lethal injection, there were many suits going on at the time, and that kept a lot of people alive. And there's a level of fortuity here, because Bruce was coming out of his federal habeas, which is, now I've got to say the word habeas, so. This is the last thing you get in the federal system, or in any system really. And he had the opportunity to try for clemency, and there'd never been a clemency in the federal system. But we went and found him new lawyers. I said when we couldn't represent people ourselves, we looked for lawyers. One thing we were able to do, our program, was also to work really closely with those lawyers. So we found a law firm for him, and the government had argued all the way through that Bruce was not intellectually disabled, which was what we used to call mentally retarded. And if you are intellectually disabled, you cannot be executed. You're not supposed to be able to be executed. But it's only as good as your lawyer, and so, or what information you have. And so his lawyers argued, he'd been in special education, he couldn't read or write, he couldn't do all these things. And the government just said, you're lying, you're lying, you're lying. So when we brought these new lawyers on to do a clemency, they figured they should try and get, and this is what we always tell people, get all the records that you can, even if you think people got them already, try and get them again. And so his lawyers moved to get the records from a social service agency. And it was Social Security Administration. And lo and behold, those records were from before the crime. Oh, they also said our client was lying because it was all to get out of the death penalty, right? So we made it all up afterwards. Lo and behold, those records said that his mother brought him in as a teenager to deal with I can't remember what the issue, something they wanted, nothing to do with mental retardation. 3 government lawyers said, well, X, Y, and Z, but this young man is intellectually disabled. They gave him an IQ score in that realm. His application was included in there, and it was sort of painful to look at. It was very childlike. And these records were suddenly turned over, and we could not get back into court because he was already through. And we tried through, and I want to give a shout out to one of my lawyers who came up with the idea to do it. We ran a sort of a different legal approach to all of this. And we lost in the district court, we lost in the appellate court, and then we won in what's called an en banc court by 1 vote. So 1 vote on the 7th Circuit said, we're going to give this guy a chance to prove that he's intellectually disabled, but the first thing he has to do is prove it wasn't his fault you didn't get those records. Because if it was his fault, we can execute him. So we got more lawyers on to help these lawyers, and they put on a terrific hearing, and it was not the lawyer's fault, it was not Bruce's fault, and he won. The only reason we got a chance to do that is because of this lethal injection suit, because it took a decade to do all this. So Bruce is no longer on death row. His co-defendant was executed during the execution time in 2020 to 2021. But that's a story of so many things. It's a story of accident. It's a story of, oh, by the way, it's a story of one vote, that saved a man's life. And by the way, that was through a special procedure in federal court that the Supreme Court has said you can no longer use. So now he would be executed, even though we know that he was intellectually disabled. And the federal government executed 2 other people who had extremely strong, and they never got into court. One of them did, and his case was decided on the basis of criteria that the Supreme Court then said was illegal, but it wouldn't apply to him. And the other guy never, ever was able to get into court to prove it. And then it's Don Salzman's law firm. We gave the case to Skadden Arps. Skadden Arps law firm worked on it, hired the leading people in the country, and they said, this man is intellectually disabled. It's proved by this, and this. Could not get into court, executed. So there's a luck involved, and it also tells you about the errors. It's rife with errors. Now, whose fault was it that those Social Security records didn't come in? Who cares? And the government fought us tooth and nail, but we ultimately prevailed, and Bruce is alive because of it. So there's a lot in there. But
That's something I've never been able to understand. Why do they fight so hard to kill someone? I mean, like she said, they will fight tooth and nail, spend millions of dollars just to take a life. Are they getting it for Satan? I mean, I don't understand that. I cannot understand. I can understand if they were sitting here and I made them angry enough to kill me or whatever, but for them to be in a political situation and them fighting so hard to take a life, it makes no sense whatsoever to me. I've had senators say, I'll go down there and pull a switch. Why?
Can I just add that Alabama's doing that right now?
Yeah.
There's a case for a man who's been on death row for 30 years. DNA didn't exist in the same way that time. And they said that he raped and with a co-defendant and killed a woman. And finally, it's another case where I was able to give it to a law firm when I was in Alabama. They got DNA from someone they suspected was the suspect. It matched him. That man had already raped another woman. And so the DNA does not match the guy who's been in death row for 30 years, and they are fighting tooth and nail, and they're going to appeal it.
And they're going to kill him. They're going to kill him. They're going to kill another good friend of mine, Anthony Boyd. He's the chair of Project Hope to abolish the death penalty.
Talladega.
Yeah, out of Talladega. They're going to kill him. And he did the crime. He was it was a little gang bang thing where he was getting back at someone for doing something to their gang, and they wouldn't set a fire, and it killed somebody. And he was 16 years old. I mean, his mind was not even nowhere close to being developed. And they're going to kill him. I mean, the young man has changed. People change. And he would never harm another living soul in his life.
There's a lot of passion on this because you could see, and hopefully you're hearing some of the things that we know to be wrong about the death penalty, the challenges, but we also know about the lives and the impacts on not just those individuals, but as a society. And I'm looking at time. I'm going to ask I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to do some Q&A. And it's a pivot, and I think it's important for us. You've got a room full of college students or guests. What would you say you want them to do? What can they do to be a part of this? And we're in all different stages. Ruth, I was reminded in one of your talks this morning, you're like, well, I can't do that. Many of us will be like, well, I can't be a death row attorney. Well, I can't. I can't speak about this. I'm not going to seminary. You know, we could say what we can't, but maybe you could share. And I'm going to start with Crystal. You know, what would you tell this room? What can we do?
There's always letter writing campaigns. There's always call your senators and your representatives and tell them what you feel about the death penalty. And there's protests everywhere, so show up.
Ruth?
I agree. I mean, absolutely. There's a lot of injustice in this world, and you're in this room because you see it. And there are things you can do. And, you know, depending on what state you're in, you might want to, and we can put you in touch with people who are working in that state or working federally or working on military death row, to work with them. I mean, there are groups like Crystal's, there are groups like Gary's that exist and would want your help. There's all kinds of levels. You can do it as a spiritual advisor, you can do it as a lawyer, you can do it as a citizen who doesn't want this done in your name. And if you have any interest, I'm happy to help you find what works for you. I think we all need to speak up when we see something's wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't sit on the fence with this. You've got to take a stand. And go to a website. Go to Indians Against the Death Penalty, Ohioans Against the Death Penalty, Witness to Innocence. If you can do nothing more than send them $5, I mean, that's helping. And it's helping greatly. Send these people money. They are doing excellent work. Don't be on the fence. Make a stand and make the right stand.
It's a challenge. A good friend who's the executive director of Witness to Innocence, he's a death row exoneree from Florida, and when he shares his story, so I'm stealing his story, he says when he received his death sentence, it said, we the people of the state of Florida sentence you to death. And so when we talk about like, oh, they want to kill us, or that means us. We, the citizens, are part of this. And so that's why I wanted to frame that question. What can we do? Because this is a part of our community and our country. And so we're going to take just 30 seconds. Lot to unpack. Just turn to the person next to you. Any quick thoughts? That'll give our panelists a moment to drink some water, and then we'll take questions from you. How does that sound? Well, welcome back. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Because sometimes we have questions that we want to ask, but sometimes I just need that second to process and share to my neighbor. Questions. What questions do you have? I think there's one right here. Thank you.
Is there any argument that the death penalty kind of makes people think before they would commit a murder?
No, sir. Every organization, police organizations, even the prosecutors' organizations, says the death penalty is not a deterrent. Okay. Most murders are a crime of passion. You get angry, you're high, you're drunk, you do something, and you say, oh my God, what have I done? You're not thinking about what's going to happen to you. You're just thinking about that instant.
Thank you for your question. Could you hand it back to her? Introduce yourself. Too.
Yes, I am Sister Annie Killian. I'm a professor in the English department. And Gary, your story about wanting to work at the hospital and not being able to, could you talk about just explain that this is never expunged from your record, but then also, even though you are off death row, the ways that this continues to impact your life?
Certainly, if I was still in the working environment, it would impact my life every day because I couldn't get a job. I could not get a job in a normal place like a hospital. I couldn't go on to a military institution and work there with
our neighbor was setting up trailers on a military base. And I asked him, did he need another man? And he said, sure. And he put my name in, and they wouldn't let me work there because of the capital punishment on my record. But I went to working for little old ladies in flower beds, you know, doing, planting flowers and fixing flower beds. And to me, that was more settling than anything I could have done. I mean, that was better in my mind, me working for them and I don't know, developing a relationship and getting word of mouth, going around the community working like that. I was working 6 days a week, making $20 an hour when I finally, before I quit work, before I got just, you know, so bad I couldn't work anymore.
Thank you. Other questions?
This is kind of inspired by the gentleman sitting over here. But, sorry. After all the appeals have been made, what do, because I know you're representing, can I say, the gentleman that's going to be executed shortly here in Indiana, and so what do lawyers do after all the appeals have been made? What's your role, I guess?
Let me just share. Larry Comp has just joined us. He's an attorney. He's representing Mr. Ward, who is scheduled for execution in Indiana this Friday. So thank you, Larry, for joining us this evening. I know it's been a very difficult, challenging time. But there's a question.
We don't give up. I mean, when the appeals are over, we don't give up, and I know that's what Larry's dealing with now. That story I told you about Bruce Webster, he was done, and we found another way. You know, one thing, it's funny, the thing I really haven't gotten to talk about this today is the clemency campaign that we did for the federal prisoners under the last administration, and a bunch of those guys, they were done. And I think one thing that's, because it's life and death, and because we care, you keep going, you keep looking for a way. It doesn't mean you'll win, it doesn't mean you'll succeed. But, you know, we didn't know that we'd get clemency for anybody, but we had to try. We couldn't let them just be executed by a following administration. But so, you know, if you want practicalities, that's one thing, is people try for clemency. There are places where people never get it, or they've gotten it. You know, Alabama's now given it twice, ever. And we were in a position where we could work really hard, and this is how I ended up here, because that's how I got to know M. Jolie and Catholic Mobilizing Network. And you know, you try and find creative ways. We don't always win, and whether that's trying to find people to appeal to the decision maker, whether it's the governor or a clemency board, or try and find ways to get back into court. It's very, very difficult. But I think we keep trying, and sometimes we succeed.
I'm in the governor's office about every 3 months handing them petitions.
Hello, I'm Alexis. I'm a student here at Notre Dame. I just have a question. Why isn't capital punishment not expunged off of someone's record, especially after they've been exonerated? Like, why is that? Thank you so much for joining us as well.
I can't explain it. I can't explain it. I've asked, you know, several attorneys. You know, several attorneys have told me in meetings like this, well, yeah, I'll go down there and I'll see what I can do. I never hear back from them, so I don't know. I can't explain it.
There's something about why don't they give up? So it's the same sort of point. They're still, they don't want to be wrong somehow. There's some investment that the system doesn't make mistakes, so that even if it's not his DNA. We're now going to say he killed her makes zero sense. But I think that's a lot of it. There are some people in some states, and Alabama is a tough state to be in, who are able to get, some compensation or whatever. But admitting, first of all, the law is very, very difficult on that. And it depends where you are, and it's all political. People don't want to admit they were wrong. But it's the creation of more victims. And they don't want to recognize that.
Yeah, Alabama would start a civil war all over again if they had to pay somebody some compensation.
Hello. My name's Jay, just a visitor here. Question for Ruth. You mentioned you're familiar with EJI. I suppose then you know Brian Stevenson?
You came in a little late.
Would this be an opportunity to maybe plug his book, Just Mercy?
So, okay, now I met Brian when I was a student and just started as a lawyer in Georgia. We were both in Georgia. So I don't really have any distance from it. He's a good friend. It's known since we were both in our 20s. It's a great book, Just Mercy, if you haven't read it. It's a beautiful book. I know it's changed all these people's minds. Like, to me, it's like, oh, well, Brian wrote a book about Walter's case. But that is a case, too, where there's so much in what you asked. I mean, I'll also put in a plug, not just for reading the book or seeing the movie, but for going to Montgomery, because EJI and Brian have created incredible sites. There's a memorial to lynching victims, there is a Peace and Reconciliation Park, and there's a museum to our history, and I think they're absolutely phenomenal. I know that Julie has been there several times, as have I, and it's hard to travel to Montgomery, it's easier to get a book, but it's an amazing organization. I'm privileged to have gotten to work there. I mean, I got to start with amazing people, and in many ways they made me glad. They gave me the tools, they gave me the support. But absolutely, read the book, go there if you can, support them. There's so many organizations doing work all over. But of course, I'm partial. I work there. Those are my people. So, yes, I'm plugging it, but I feel biased. Did that answer what you were looking for?
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your lived experiences. Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm Duda. I'm in the second year Master of Global Affairs International Peace Studies concentration. And I'm working with the Restorative Justice Collaborative Hub here in South Bend. And I think the death penalty for me seems a part of an iceberg that is the criminal and the justice system iceberg that is pretty unfair. So I wonder if you can share more about your thoughts on the changes that need to be done in this system that is still reinforcing so much pain and oppression. And also, Gray, I made a poem for you. Just listen to your story. And it says, please tell me, in the death row, can hope flow? I found an answer in a lived story of someone who is alive and away of a death row, who can have quiet eyes and that carries the pain of an injustice state, but also the strain of a brave person that won't give up.
Crystal, maybe you can address, you've been in this advocacy, you've been talking about this for years. Maybe you can address her question. Thank you for that poem. Hopefully you'll share that with Gary afterwards.
Give me the question again. I'm sorry.
Do you want to restate your question it was about systems, right? And looking at, I'll let you reframe your question.
Okay, basically the changes that you also need that have been done, that needs to be done in the justice, criminal system, also to address changes that goes beyond the death penalty.
Great, that's a great question. First of all, when we put people in the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, there needs to be rehabilitation in that. There's a lot of correction. And part of the correction that the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction believes is murdering people. That's not correcting anything. It's not part of rehabilitation. So what needs to be changed is there needs to be a lot of restorative justice. What's going on to cause, you know, some of the poverty issues, some of racism issues, what's going on in communities that can be restored so that we don't get to this point. We were talking earlier, the four of us, about some stories of people that have been imprisoned, and a lot of these stories with women who have been abused or molested or different things, with men who, you know, same thing, different scenarios. How can we start with that in youth and everything? How can we restore not the system, but our communities?
And most people don't realize prisons are big business. Somebody makes a lot of money out of those prisons.
Can I just add something too? I agree with you fully about our system this is the pinnacle of it, but it's pretty rotten all the way through. There's reason to be hopeful too, in that it's horrible to see these executions on the rise. But death sentencing is way down from what it used to be. And executions were way down as well. And there are lots of reasons for that, but I think one of them is also seeing that we make big mistakes. And I think some people are a little afraid, you know, do we really want to agree to go with this? But we know that there are mistakes that are made, and there's reasons to be hopeful. I think telling the stories is really huge. You know, after the executions in the federal system, we put a lot, or during while it was going on, we put out a lot in the media about the guys' cases, about the mistakes that have been made, about the lies that the government told to put people on the road, about the fact that this woman had been sex trafficked by her mother and that was never presented to a jury, all this kind of stuff. And it was people weren't happy about that. Did it change the whole country? No, of course not. But I think it had a lot to do with why we ultimately got clemencies afterwards, because people were disturbed by the way this was going down. So I think tell the stories, you know, get it out there, education and absolutely restore justice.
We are going to soon transition, but I wanted to give Gary, I showed you, and we'll show this in a minute, the October executions, and Gary knows one of the individuals, and he's a friend of Gary's. But I wanted you to share, you were sharing with us earlier, about what happens when they're on the day of an execution. Because I think sometimes we forget that there's a life. There's a life. We think sometimes capital punishment is supposed to be for the worst of the worst. They're a monster. We lock them away. But there's a life that is living in prison. And I think when on days of executions, can you share, Gary, what happens in Alabama?
Everybody refrains from sports. Okay, Alabama is unique in that sense where they get to go out in groups of 20 and 30 and exercise. Everybody wears their dress whites. "15 minutes before the person is to be executed, everybody on death row starts beating and banging on their bars so the person on death row can hear them and know that they're there for them. You know, you're not going out by yourself. We're family. We're still here. And we're going to continue to remember you." And that's, I mean, it occurred the other night in a different situation where another gentleman was taping this, and it brought back terrible memories. I mean, we do it
for the people that's being executed out of loyalty, but it is very traumatic. It's very traumatic afterwards.
Thank you, Gary, for sharing. And I wanted it's a powerful understanding of what happens. And Gary, you said we want people to know that they're not going out alone. And I think that's so important, that we're not going out alone. And in this work, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for Gary, Crystal, and Ruth to be here, and for Klau for hosting us, because in this work, and for Larry to be here, is because we need to know we're not alone. And I know many of you are studying human rights and peace studies, and the work can be challenging. And so you need to know you're not alone, and that we need other people, whether it be in solidarity or because we need to just support each other in this work. Can we please give Gary and Crystal and Ruth a round of applause? Thank you for traveling. Everyone traveled to be here for this event, but also for sharing your lives. You know, it's not just a story, but it's your life with us. And so it's a privilege to be here with you. I'm going to hop to the podium, and I just want to, I think oftentimes we end and we feel like, oh, what can I do? Am I left with nothing? What can you do? And the panelists had started to share. So you can do something. And figure what that means for you. Gary had mentioned maybe learn, right? So one is take action. And so Catholic Mobilizing Network, many organizations, you can send letters to your governor, your local legislators. You can say, this is not right. This is not what I believe. And so take action. Indiana Abolition Coalition, this is for the state of Indiana. If you're from a different state, Google it. Happy to connect you. Find your local state organization that's doing this work so you can find out what new legislation's happening, what legislators are saying about this. What does your governor say about this issue? October, again, here are the gentlemen that are scheduled for execution. Anthony Boyd in Alabama is Gary's friend. Lance Shockley, I had the opportunity to meet him with Larry. He is on, Larry Comp is one of the attorneys on Lance's team. Very holy individual, and he's scheduled for execution next week. Again, Mr. Comp here is Roy Ward's attorney. Get to know who these individuals are. If you go on our webpage, you can learn more. Actually, I'm going to go back. There's some flyers outside. So from the Diocese of Gary, on Thursday, there's a prayer vigil at 8 p.m. to pray for Mr. Roy Lee Ward. And so find ways in which you can get involved. Follow us on social media, and then learn. You have to learn. So whether it be through your classes, I know there's a lot of different clinics here, institutes, write a paper, go on a webpage, go on Witness to Innocence, pray, whatever that might look like for you. And so, you know, there's prayer we learned is part of some people's stories. Gary talked about people, pen pals praying for him. And so those are some of the things that you can do. I love that we had a poet in our space. And so I felt like it's so opportune is that Catholic Mobilizing Network to engage young people. We actually have a poetry contest. I'm not going to say, but you could submit that poem. It will have a blind judges, but we do have a prize of $1,000. So again, there's ways in which we can express ourselves about this issue. Catholic Mobilizing Network has an internship program. Stefan here is our young adult associate. And so again, our work is to engage all of you, young and younger and older, in this work. Again, I want to say thank you. Thank you for Notre Dame and for Klau for hosting us. Thank you for the decades of work that you have been doing, Gary, Crystal, and Ruth. It's an inspiration and a privilege to work with you. And I'm also recognizing that in this room are people who have, who are professors and faculty and people who work in the diocese and have been long time advocates and supporters. So we each have our part. And so I'm going to challenge you. That, and Ruth said that we're moving in the right direction, that public opinion is changing, but you will be the next juror. You will be the next defense attorney, prosecutor. You will be the next judge. You might be the next governor, president. And so you have the ability to make change. Figure out what that means for you today. Take something, whatever that means for you, and figure out what that could mean. So thank you again for being here with us this evening. And we're going to end with prayer. I think it's Arlene. You can slide through.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Arlene. I'm the Associate Director here at the Klau Institute. I just really want to thank Emjali and Stefan for organizing this event. And I'd really like to thank Ruth, Crystal, and Gary for their inspiring stories, their ongoing work for justice, and their advocacy on this important issue. So let's thank them again. And after prayer, there's some heavy hors d'oeuvres out in the lobby, so please join us for that as well. Please join me in prayer. God of compassion, you let your rain fall on the just and unjust. Expand and deepen our hearts so that we may love you as you love, even those among us who have caused us pain. For there is in our land a great cry for vengeance as we fill up death row and kill the killers in the name of justice. Jesus, our brother, you suffered execution at the hands of the state, but you did not let hatred overcome you. Help us to reach out to victims of violence so that our love may help them heal. Holy Spirit of God, you strengthen in us the struggle for justice. Help us to work tirelessly for the abolition of state-sanctioned death and to renew our society in its very heart so that violence will be no more. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you again for being here tonight.